and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that, we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interest, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Holness, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chan, Dr. Chan, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Malahoo Ford, Mr. Spencer, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Green, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mr. Hales not here, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mr. Main, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Terry Long, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Wright. Dr. Chang. Minister Henry. Mr. Henry. Mr. Mackenzie. He answered. Dr. Ferguson.
Statements by ministers. Mr. Paulwell.
Mr. Speaker, the time is now 2:59 p.m. and I saw you trying to approach the chambers about 30 minutes ago without luck. Yesterday, we started the Parliament a little after 3. And one can always understand the difficulties at times in starting early. But, Mr. Speaker, there was a commitment given by yourself recently, and we got into the habit of starting the Parliament promptly. I believe even if we have to start and call off the Parliament, I think the signal that we send, that we respect time and we want to be punctual, should continue, and that we should start at 2. If there is a difficulty, then you call off. But not even an apology was given yesterday, and I do hope something will be said today, and that next time we meet, we'll be able to start the Parliament on time.
Mr. Paulwell, at the next item of announcement, I had intended to make a comment, but your comment is understood, and in the future, I want to advise that there are times when the Parliament, for reasons sometimes not fully explained, it's going to be late. But I will agree that once there's a quorum, we should start the Parliament, and we can suspend the Parliament with an explanation and start again. I will endeavor to advise my parliamentarian colleagues that let us do it that way. Announcements. Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Members, under announcement, I should have proceeded to recognize 2 visitors. We have with us the Honorable Darrell Smith, Minister of Sports and Youth Affairs from the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, along with the Secretary. The Minister chose to look down on us rather than look across, and so he preferred to stay in the gallery beside the Secretary. We are also 2 members of our Senate and a former member. They deserve to be acknowledged. Papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, I tabled some questions which are due to be answered today. I haven't been given any indication that the questions are going to be answered. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, from last year, from January last year, I tabled questions in this House. They fell off the order paper. I retabled them. They fell off the order paper again. It was a year and 3 months. I tabled the questions on the 28th of February. They are due to be answered today. Nothing has been said to me. And I just find this just a disregard for the Parliament. just a disregard for the Parliament. It can't be that, and allow me, allow me. This issue is related to carousel. It's an important issue which affects national security, telecoms, and I just want to remind the House of the context. The Contractor General made a recommendation not to award the license. The government went ahead and did so. The US government intervened, visas were revoked. The government took steps to revoke the licenses. The company took them to court. There has been no statement from the government as to the status of this company. We heard in the media that the company was sold. We have followed the procedure of asking questions. And again, there has been nothing, nobody has said anything to me, no request for additional time to answer the questions. It's not acceptable. If we can't come to Parliament, follow the rules, ask questions and expect to get answers, what's the point of being here? What's the point of being here? I have stood up, and you can attest to this, on about 4 or 5 occasions. You have then pointed to the House Leader, you have gotten an assurance, and nothing has happened. It can't go on so. Can't go on so.
Mr. Speaker, before you intervene, I resent any effort to try and score a political point in this floor of the Parliament. The issue is that questions were ready last week to be answered. Questions were ready last week to be answered. And the leader of opposition business asked us to withhold it because he did not want the question to be asked on the day that the leader of opposition speak. Okay? He was speaking last week, Thursday, and he asked for them to be withhold, to give him the full day, the full attention of the day. And it's the reason why they were not answered last week. And you want us, just hold on, you want us to hold back on questions and answer the questions to allow your leader to get the full day, okay? The full attention. The Minister of Finance is speaking today. At least he deserves that courtesy, okay? All questions, sit down, I'm on my feet. Mr. Speaker, I'm on my feet, and I'm not finished. I'm on my feet and not finished. I'm on my feet. You can't have 2 on your feet, sir. Minister, you cannot have 2 men on your feet.
Minister, please. With the greatest of respect.
This standing order said, Mr. Speaker, before you speak, you cannot have 2 members on their feet.
I'm not going to allow a
You
debate.
cannot have 2 members on their feet, Mr. Speaker.
The member has made a comment, and you have
cannot have 2 members on their feet, and I'm insisting.
You have answered him.
No, I have not completed. I have not completed. And he did not ask for a point of order. Regardless, you cannot have 2 members on their feet in the Parliament. So you make a ruling now.
Mr.
I'm on my feet.
You cannot stand where the person is speaking.
I'm on my feet.
Member, have a seat.
So I can respond to.
Members.
So the respect that was shown to the opposition must be shown to government members. Okay? All questions will be dealt with next week, Tuesday.
Yes, just to
One minute, Mr. Paulwin.
Yes.
1 minute.
Yeah.
There is no space under this item for the debate that is taking place.
I'm not in a debate.
If you expect me to operate to the standing orders.
It's a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Paulwell,
yes.
With the greatest of respect, Mr. Robinson has brought something to my attention. Yeah. The leader of government business has made a statement on it, and I am going to make a comment.
Yes, but I also want you to take what I have to say into contemplation. So Mr. Speaker, there are 2 points I wish to make. Firstly,
order, please.
Yes. Firstly, the questions weren't due last week, so it would not have been a relevant issue. And it wasn't raised with me at all because the questions are due to be answered today. So what the acting House Leader has said is not true. Secondly,
Point of order. Don't call me a liar. You asked me last week to hold those the answer to the question.
But they weren't
call me a liar.
But they weren't due.
Don't ever call me a liar. I don't lie. Don't ever call me a liar.
Mr. Speaker, the questions are due on the 21st of March.
Mr. Palwell.
I have another point to make.
Mr. Palwell, please have a seat.
I have another point to make.
Please have a seat and let me make a comment. Questions when asked have a time and they are expected to be answered. If they cannot be answered, there is a place in the standing order that says what is to be done. On this occasion, the leader of government business and yourself, without consulting the member, the speaker, and I'm going to ask that we do not debate this issue because it's not on the item for debate. I understand what Mr. Robinson has said. I've taken stand on that, and I now hear what the two leaders have said.
Hold on.
But Mr. Speaker, there is a further point though. Last week, we specifically asked some questions, and we were promised by the House leader that they would have been answered before the member speaks today. Those were questions that were raised in the Standing Finance Committee. Questions in relation to the Ministry of Industry, questions in relation to the Ministry of Mining, and they were the Minister of Finance and myself. We discussed that they were raised and they were to be answered. To date, not a word.
Mr. Speaker,
The Speaker
on a matter
is going to...
on a matter of procedure. You know, I won't continue, but I completely concur with the sentiments expressed by the House leader, because there are matters that are of great national importance that could have been handled and ought properly to have been handled today by me on behalf of my ministry, which I have foregone in the interest of hearing the Minister of Finance in totality, without interruption. And when the issue came up, I was actually in the vicinity of the call that he made to the opposition leader, and he willingly agreed that nothing would interrupt on that day when the opposition leader was to speak. That is only courtesies that are to be extended to us in this House. So don't bother come with no answer to questions in the Finance Committee of the House, which does not take priority over anything in this House. Nothing.
Mr. Speaker.
Last comment, Mr. Robinson.
You know, if the House leader or the minister who was to answer the questions had come to me and said to me, listen, I will answer the questions a week later. Sought discussion with me, which is in keeping with the standing orders. Wouldn't have a problem, but you can't just come here and pull this thing that, oh, because of those questions, you're not going to answer it. You're treating the Parliament with disrespect. It's a year and 3 months I have questions that have not been answered, and you know how many times I've gotten up, right? So if somebody wants a delay, then you come to the person who has asked the questions, and I will object to it.
I want to ask the House leader to make sure that the questions are answered next week. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, on the public...
Order, please. Members on both sides, ministers and others.
Mr. Speaker, on the public business today, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, on the public business today, we're going to take item number 9, number 10. You ask what it is? The order of business before you remember. We're going to be taking order number 9, number 10 on the government business, and then we're going to take 42. So at this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask you to invite the chairman for the Regulation Committee to take order item number 42.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister Shaw. Members, please. Minister Warmington. Go ahead. Mr. Witt.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the motion that was laid on Mr. Speaker, I ask that the item number 42.
Members, I am going to
I ask that the motion
call names on both sides of the aisle today. And I'm going to ask the Marshal to stand by.
Mr. Speaker,
Go ahead, Mr. Whittam.
I ask that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, this time the Minister of Finance and the Public Service to take item number 9 and number 10.
Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, this has to do with the Pensions Public Service Regulations 2018, which were tabled in the House, and the Pensions Public Service Special Early Retirement Program Order 2018. Mr. Speaker, it should be recalled that the Pensions Public Service Bill was passed in the Houses of Parliament and assented by the Governor-General in October of 2017. The Pensions Public Service Regulations 2018 and the Special Early Retirement Program Order, companions to the Act, were tabled in this House on February 15, 2018. Mr. Speaker, today I open the debate on the pension regulations and the Special Early Retirement Program Order for passage through both houses before April 1, 2018, when the reform to the public sector pension system is scheduled to be implemented, especially as it relates to the Special Early Retirement Program being offered by the government. Mr. Speaker, the regulations give further details on provisions relating to the public sector pension scheme. As such, it encompasses provisions about the entitlement and rules for the calculation of pensions and other benefits. Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to now highlight some of the important provisions of the regulations. In particular, Regulation 3 in Part 2 of the regulations contains provisions explaining what qualifying service is to be taken into account in the calculation of one's pension. Regulation 3 also provides details of the circumstances in which the service of an officer employed as a casual daily paid, part-time, or temporary employee is taken into account for the calculation of a pension or gratuity. Regulation 7 describes the emoluments to be taken into account in computing pension or gratuity. The average of the final 3 years pensionable emoluments enjoyed by an employee before the date of his or her retirement will be used in the formula for the calculation of pension benefits. Part 3 of the regulations contains provisions relating to rates of payment for pensionable officers. Provisions in this part stipulate how the pension benefits will be calculated for every pensionable officer who has been employed in the public service for 10 or more years at retirement. It also details how gratuities will be calculated for pensionable officers who had not been in the service for 10 years and so would not qualify for pension on the attainment of normal retirement age. Provisions are also included in this part detailing how benefits are calculated in the circumstances where officers retire as a result of injury or disease or ill health. Part 4 of the regulations contains provisions relating to calculation of pension and other benefits for constables. As such, the regulations in this part stipulate how pension will be calculated for those who have been in the force for 10 years or more on attainment of the normal retirement age. It also describes the calculation of gratuities to constables who had not been in the force for 10 years and so would not qualify for a pension. There are other similar provisions in this part which describe the benefits payable to constables retiring on the ground of ill health, injury, or disease. Part 5, Mr. Speaker, of the regulations outlines the provisions relating to compassionate gratuities. It should be noted that the compassionate gratuity is a one-time payment to a daily paid temporary or part-time employee who would not have qualified or have been eligible for a pension. Regulations under this part, therefore, describe who qualifies for a compassionate gratuity, how the gratuity is calculated, and the circumstances of payment where an employee dies while in the public service. Part 6 provides for survivor's benefit. That is payment to beneficiaries of a deceased pensionable officer. The regulations in this part stipulate how the benefits are calculated and the entitlements of the surviving spouse and or children. Part 7 relates to teachers and provides the circumstances where the service of teachers with other teaching service in other territories, such as other Caribbean and Commonwealth countries, can be used in the calculation of pension benefits. The list of applicable countries is contained in the schedule to the regulations. Part 8 describes the particulars required for registers and service credit records for teachers and pensionable officers. The regulations in this part contain provisions relating to service to be categorized as teaching service and the personal information or records that must be stored in the registers and service credit records with respect to teachers and other pensionable officers while in the employment of the public service. This information is critical as it is necessary for the calculation of pension benefits. And Mr. Speaker, the Pensions Public Service Special Early Retirement Program Order 2018. This order, which is subject to affirmative resolution, sets out the conditions for the special early retirement program that the government is offering. It should be noted that the public sector workers have already been sensitized about the program and as such the contents of the order. The order outlines the starting and ending date of the program. That is April 1, 2018 and April 30, 2019, respectively, the eligible participants and the incentives of the program. Mr. Speaker, the Pensions Public Service Regulations 2018 and the Special Early Retirement Program Order are initial steps in reforming the public sector pension system in keeping with the act that was passed last year in Parliament. It is aimed at making the system more affordable and sustainable for the government while providing adequate pension benefits to the hard-working public sector employees of the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Golin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Minister, the regulations made under the Pension Act, or Pensions Act, the one that was... Sorry, sir? I think I'll try and enhance the sound, sir. Yes, I hope that's better. Yes, Minister, the legislation was passed last year, and at the time, and I think it was maybe in September or there, quite a few months, October, the question arose, you know, what would the regulations going to look like? Because there are many issues of importance that are addressed in the regulations. It would have been good, I think, if the regulations could have been brought here earlier, because as I understand it, they're urgent now because you want to have them in effect and approved before the beginning of the coming fiscal year, which I understand. It's just that because we're in the middle of the budget process, I think that the type of attention that they deserve may not have been brought to them because one has been focusing on the estimates and all of the other documents that have been filed as part of the budget process. But what I would like to understand, Minister, is this. Does this mean that contributions will start, and I think you've said you're going to phase them in over a period of time, I think 1% per annum is the... Those who are not already contributing, yeah. Will those contributions now go into a segregated trust fund of which trustees are appointed, or what will happen to those contributions? Currently, of course, those who contribute to the consolidated funds so that the government gets the benefit of the cash flows from that. When the idea of the pensions legislation is that the contributions will go into a separate trust fund, and there's quite a elaborate governance regime to ensure proper management of those funds and so on. What is not clear to me is when that will be actually activated. Is it going to start right away up front when the contributions start, or is it not anticipated that it will begin in this coming fiscal year, for example? And in terms of the government's contribution, you know, what is anticipated in relation to that, in terms of the timing of it and the amount of it? If you could shed some light on that, it would be appreciated. I think my colleague from...
Yeah. Mr. Speaker?
Clarendon has.
Mr. Speaker? Not so sure.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes. Minister, I join with my colleague, the opposition spokesman on finance, that it would have been good if we had seen the regulations. I'm trying to ask the orderly, you said it was tabled, I haven't seen it, but when you opened the debate on the pension reform last year, you will recall that I made an intervention and raised a number of issues with you, and you had promised that these things would be coming in the regulations. Issues such as portability of pension in the public service. I raised it against the background because several members in this House were part of the Joint Select Committee, first started by Senator Arthur Williams, chaired by him and his team, continued by me, and we hammered out a number of things, and one of the issues was the portability of public sector pension. You promised that these things would have been addressed in the regulations. So we'd like to know, has it been dropped? Have the workers, through their unions, not interested in the portability of their pension anymore. Secondly, I am advised that the major problem with the implementation of the Pension Act is that to date, there is no agreement with the unions regarding the methodology to be used for the calculation of pension. While the government proposed average of the last 3 years, the public sector workers who will be paying this pension, some have started to pay already, police was paying, maybe only one group that wasn't paying are the teachers. And they had proposed to the government in the discussions, because remember, you know, we have been talking, you all been talking with the unions, that they recommended the last year's salary as the base for their computation of their pension. Now I hear you announce that it is the average of the last 3 years. My question to you, Honorable Minister, has this been agreed by the workers? That is the formula you're going to use for the calculation. We have no difficulty on this side with the special early retirement program. In fact, the early retirement of public sector workers has always been on the books. Now it is in an order, and from time to time we encourage, in the last wage agreements, it was there. It has always been there, and we have no difficulty with that, so I don't need to comment on that. My other concern, and I'm sure the concern of many pensioners watching, listening to you presenting these regulations, which we don't have, is the timely payment of pension. And I would believe that in the regulations you would have something that says, after retirement, an individual should be able to access their pension within 90 days. Something like that. I know people who have worked for government for years upon years, and we have to call Minister for Intervention, call the technical staff. I remember one policeman, I don't want to call his name, 19 years he has been waiting for his pension. Finally, last month, the officers in the Ministry of Finance and Planning walked the file through for Officer X to get his little pension. I'm saying the regulations must hold the government to some level of certainty and reliability in how and when a pensioner is going to be able to access their pension. So as I said, I have seen the regulations, and it would have been good order of business. I don't know which member has seen the regulations. I have seen it. I worked on it. Just like other colleagues from your side, you started the reform, and I said, Arthur Williams, Senator Williams did a lot of work on it with his team. The Joint Select Committee, which I led, did a lot of work. And I would have preferred to have seen a set of regulations that are revolutionary. And, you know, maybe you'll be able to address it, but as I say, I haven't seen it. There's another concern which I had promised when I presented the report of the Joint Select Committee, which is sacrosanct, which is to maintain the lump sum payment policy of your pension, meaning when you retire, you can get a lump sum before you get the monthly thing. Because people, when you work for 30, 40 years and you're retiring, you still have a mortgage. That lump sum is what clear them off, clear off some debt, etc., etc., and then they wait on their monthly payment. Is the lump sum payment still maintained in the revised, in the new regulations? I hope you'll be able to address it. If not today, you're speaking, and I'm looking forward to see you closing the debate. But these are, you know, something that you and I have discussed. These are important things for the workers of Jamaica who are in the public service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Tweed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of process, we all would wish to have this matter completed. But if the regulations were tabled before, there was no agenda item that I was aware of that would have constrained me to find those regulations that had been tabled some time ago and have them ready and study them for this occasion. It's really wrong to vote on something that you haven't seen or are not familiar with. And I think the process of Parliament must allow us the normal notice so that we can, in fact, respond. Secondly, I'd like to ask the Minister, the persons who have opted for early retirement, will they have to be replaced? And if so, what is the net benefit to the economy of the public sector? And further, would he give his opinion as to whether those who have opted for early retirement are perhaps those with the most experience and people we would really want to keep? And is this, in fact, in terms of the productivity of the public service, not a counterproductive action?
Go ahead, Mr. Hilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, there was contemplated that a 4% family benefit contribution would be taken. Is it contemplated now to take that from the employee benefit salary? Is it still being contemplated? A 4% family benefit contribution. Is it being? It's being paid now. Will that continue from the employee employee salary?
Mr. Paulwell.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Minister, Mr. Minister, I want to raise a matter that is tangential to the regulations that have been submitted, but probably not, strictly speaking, within the terms of these regulations. And it might appear to be subservient for us inside here, but I was just reminded recently about the situation with people who drive us, our drivers. And I really want to urge that the ministry takes a special look at those persons who work for us, like our drivers, who are not, who do not benefit from a pension. And we could extend it to those secretaries in our constituencies who also work for us. It is now relevant for me because more of these persons are reaching the age where these things matter. And Minister, I really want to urge that we do something quickly for them. May I please?
Minister Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable members for their questions and their concerns. Now, first of all, let me say to the member, several members have said they have not seen the regulations. The regulations have been tabled here in Parliament. They have been tabled from early in February. They were tabled in Parliament. Pardon me? Well, I think that was, pardon me? Yes, it was tabled on the 15th of February. So, yeah. The member, with respect, the member has an obligation. Once issues are tabled in Parliament, you have an obligation to acquaint yourself with it if you have a keen interest in the matter. Okay? Okay. A number of questions were raised, and I'll just answer them each as they came. In terms of the question the member, the opposition spokesman on finance has raised, has to do with the issue of whether a segregated trust fund will be established. That question did arise during the debate on the substantive bill, and I think the leader of the opposition had raised it in October of last year. We didn't indicate that we are going to be going in accordance with the provisions of the bill, which state that it is given to the discretion of the minister when to put it into effect its operation. So there is the intention to create this segregated fund. But the reason why this flexibility has been imposed in the law is that, as you know, the pension bill that we are facing right now is quite substantial. I think it's in excess of $30 billion now on an annual basis in the budget, and growing. So at this stage, we are not in a position to commence the imposition of a segregated fund because of the volume, the sheer volume of the obligation. So we have to take contributions towards settling that substantial bill on an annual basis. But it is the intention that down the line we will be setting up a segregated fund. That is actually the desirable approach, and we plan to do that. In terms of the portability of pensions, I'm to indicate that while there's no defined benefits plan, but that portability would be available moving from one government department to another. So to that extent, that portability does exist. So if you're a policeman that move and start working somewhere else in another capacity, then it's portable in that sense. It can move from one agency or department to another. In terms of the methodology of the last 3 years, that is actually what is in the law now. And the question the member has asked is whether this has been an issue that is a negotiated matter with the unions. I think that point has been raised about whether it should be the last year, but that the advisors and the best advice that we have gotten in terms of best practices is that we use the average of the last 3 years. And that, as of now, is what is in the law. The question of that the member from Clarendon has mentioned, early access to pensions and the present lateness in computation and making it available. I have to join with you in saying that it is totally unacceptable, right? In fact, Prime Minister, I went to a funeral on Saturday where a former councillor from Clarendon died, from the Moko division died. And as Minister of Finance, I was somewhat embarrassed to hear a person giving a tribute saying that the lady died without getting access to her pension. And I made a commitment right then and there on the platform in the church that we have to interrogate this matter in a very serious and careful way to find out what are the inhibitors. When people work hard, time to get their pension, we have to clear the way for them to get their pensions. It's unacceptable. So I intend to sit with the appropriate department and really find out what is it that is causing this delay. In some of the matters that have come to me, it seems as if some of the information that has to come from different departments, agencies down the line. There are all kinds of administrative pitfalls, that obstacles that appear to be in the way. But it is something that clearly we are going to have to work diligently to streamline. In terms of the regulations, someone has asked for for more revolutionary changes, and I think that what we are tabling here is not set in concrete. We want to move towards a more perfect system, and what we have to do is take on board ideas, right? Not to revolutionize the regulations, yes, and to certainly start the revolution by getting people their pension early. And that's something that we are committed to looking at carefully, and as Minister, I'm committing to Parliament that we have to take a very careful look at that. In terms of lump sum payments, there is a provision for that. Of course, there is a trade-off on that. Regulation number 18 stipulates that when an officer retires, he or she can elect to receive his or her pension as a gratuity and then subsequently a reduced pension or as a full pension. So you have the option. You take a gratuity and then the monthly amount becomes smaller, or you just take a normal pension right through the system. So that flexibility, in fact, does exist. The issue, the persons leaving are persons whom I'm reading now from a note sent to me. Persons leaving are persons whom this is the early retirement issue that was asked by the member as to whether there would be, do they have to be replaced? The issue is that by and large they do not have to be replaced. That is why there's a process where they apply, and then it has to be carefully examined to determine whether there in fact is a need to have that replacement. Well, let me read this note directly to you as well. Persons leaving are persons whom the permanent secretary of each ministry would approve, and so arrangements have been made to close any gaps before the approval is made. That is to say, make sure that that workload, the distribution of it is adequately covered in order to accommodate the early retirement. But it makes it cannot be that it's early retirement means you retire early and you hire somebody else to replace the post. That would be, in fact, defeating the purpose of early retirement. And what is this now? The compassionate gratuity. Well, I think I've already dealt with that. But I want to really say that on this issue of pensions, pardon me? Yes. Certainly, I agree with the member that our drivers, our secretaries in the constituency, offices and so on, we need to really sit down and work out a formula to see how best we can help to create some welfare and comfort in terms of pension for them. So I think that, quite frankly, I think these are things that require our collective input in order to make sure that we look out for the welfare of all of our workers at every level. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Move this order.
Minister,
yes.
I had asked if the 4% family benefit contribution, would that continue?
That is now rolled into one contribution, but the benefits, more importantly, will continue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Shaw, we put in both motions. Number 9 and 10. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, at this time we'll have the closing of the appropriation, the debate on the appropriation bill. So I ask you to invite the Honourable Minister of Finance and the Public Service to conclude the debate.
Mr. Shaw. Minister Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to once again, Mr. Speaker, thank the staff of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service and other agencies for their assistance in the course of preparations for this debate. And I want to, at the outset, acknowledge once again the presence of my dear wife in the and she's ably guarded by her father, who is beside her. And my wife is here for the first time for my closing presentation because, no, she's putting all mischief aside. My wife is here on this occasion because today is the anniversary of our wedding. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to thank the honourable members who contributed in this debate, the opposition spokesman on finance, for his maiden contribution, and in fact, the leader of the opposition's maiden contribution as well. And of course, I have to specially thank the Honourable Prime Minister, who I'll have to be dubbing shortly as the great builder. For his contribution yesterday. It is also important to specifically recognize the essential role in the formulation and debate of the budget played by the public and by civil society, especially the press. There's a new energy among Jamaican taxpayers, which I also applaud. They realize that this budget is about their money and how this administration will act as a reliable steward of their resources. We must pass the people's test, Mr. Speaker. In these remarks, I will briefly outline a summary of the budget, address some of the inaccuracies and misleading statements by the opposition. Notice I said some of them. I wouldn't have time to address all of them. I will address some of the suggestions also of the opposition and provide some third-party thoughts on our administration and budget, and then, of course, to provide some concluding remarks. Mr. Speaker, by way of a brief summary of the budget, I would like to give thanks to Almighty God for bringing us safely to the end of another fiscal year. I'd also like to thank the opposition for working with us throughout the budget season in terms of our schedule, which we wanted to keep tight in order to fulfill our obligations to complete the process before the start of the new fiscal year. We have tabled, Mr. Speaker, our supplementary budget, and we had to do two of them on this occasion, which involves the necessary tidying up that was needed. And we have successfully laid a budget totaling just under $774 billion, which is lower than the previous budget. The key highlights of our budget, Mr. Speaker, are that we successfully implemented the final phase of the 1.5 million income tax threshold plan in January of this year, which we promised. And I will be returning to that issue because it seemed to have attracted some concern and expressions from the opposition. So I will be returning. I shall return to that subject. We have, we have outlined our detailed 3-year medium-term expenditure projections beyond the upcoming fiscal year, and this is, of course, a historic first in the budget. I want to indicate that in terms of outlining that medium-term projection, it doesn't mean that over time it doesn't have to be adjusted, so that as the economy grows and things improve, then you will have even more optimistic projections in terms of the medium term. We have increased expenditure substantially in education, health, national security, unlike the thinking of the opposition spokesman on finance, and social programs to protect the poorest and most vulnerable in the society by a total of $13 billion. We have increased capital expenditure by $15 billion, or 33% increase in non-debt capital expenditure, to invest in productive infrastructure that is essential for us to achieve our economic growth targets. We have reduced debt service as a percentage of the total budget from 46% down to 37%, which we believe will contribute to Jamaica's debt-to-GDP ratio falling below 100% for the first time in decades. We project that by the end of this fiscal year, our debt-to-GDP ratio will be in the region of 94.3%. For the first time in a long time, it will be under 100% of gross domestic product. We project in this new fiscal year that we will maintain a primary surplus of 7%, our economy will grow, inflation will remain within our target range of 4 to 6%, and that we will achieve the target wage to GDP of 9% by the end of this new fiscal year. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we have accomplished these levels of fiscal responsibility and increased social and capital expenditure without imposing any new taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. For the first time in 14 years, no new taxes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent on me to address inaccuracies or half-truths by the opposition spokesman on finance that at best reflect a lack of research or knowledge on his part, or at worst represent a deliberate attempt to mislead this honorable House or the people of Jamaica. The Prime Minister effectively corrected the false historical narrative of the opposition spokesman on finance and the opposition leader about the origin of Jamaica's fiscal and economic crisis, which was primarily a result of the disastrous and devastating high interest rate and high inflation policies of the PNP during the 1990s and 2000 period. In his attempt to portray the PNP as a party of fiscal discipline and responsibility, he made several demonstrably false claims. For example, he stated that the PNP established Tax Administration Jamaica as a semi-autonomous revenue agency with its own board to provide policy guidance and good governance. Here are the facts. The JLP government launched a comprehensive tax reform program in 2009, which led to the establishment of the TAJ as a semi-autonomous revenue authority by the JLP in May of 2011. As a wise man once said, facts are a stubborn thing. On economic issues, the minister has once again either not done his research properly or is attempting to mislead this honorable body. Both the spokesman and the opposition leader claimed that the JLP, quote, inherited the national debt In one case, 147%, one said close to 150% of GDP in 2012. This is again false. False. The actual national debt in 2012, when we left it, 2011, end of 2011, was 131.3% of GDP, for far less than the 150% being claimed by the opposition spokesman. It is important that we correct these issues. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the national debt was actually on a downward trend under the JLP government at the end of our term, particularly after the implementation of the historical Jamaica debt exchange, conceptualized and implemented by the JLP government, at which time I was also the finance minister in 2010. As a factual matter, the debt to GDP ratio actually fell between 2010 and 2011. The opposition would also have us believe, and that fall was marginal because it came down from about 103.7% down to 103.2%. The opposition, or 0.3%. The opposition would also have us believe that they reduced unemployment when the PNP took over. The facts show otherwise. In 2011, when this government left office, unemployment was 12.8%. And that, of course, as you know, was in part because of the global economic crisis that hit Jamaica in 2008 and 2009, which you have made no reference to, by the way. You have made no reference to it. And it is the worst global economic crisis ever to hit the world in over 80 years. And you feel you shouldn't mention that. And that was part of why the unemployment rate went up. After the PNP came back into office, unemployment grew, Mr. Speaker, to 13.9% in 2012 and peaked at 15.3% in 2013 under the People's National Party government. Since then, unemployment has been slowly declining. Under the JLP administration, the unemployment rate has fallen to a historical low of 10.4% in October of 2017, down from 12.9% when we took over the government in 2016. Facts, Mr. Speaker, facts, not fiction. The opposition spokesman also touted the PNP record of reducing inflation. In fact, in 2011, when the JLP government left office, inflation had been reduced to 6%. When the PNP was in power, inflation again began to increase to a high of almost 10% in 2013, a 50% increase in inflation. Since that time, inflation has trended down significantly and is expected to end up at between 4.5 to 4.7% in this fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader stated that he, and I quote, took this country from the brink of bankruptcy and disaster. I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it. Because countryman say man for bare face, but not a bare face boy. He said this country, he took this country from the brink of bankruptcy and disaster. When the PNP came to office in 2012, my little 8-year-old daughter would say, this is pure foolishness. That is what my daughter would say, pure foolishness. This is revisionist history, and the facts tell a different story. The facts tell a different story. I'm going to tell you the facts now. The Prime Minister The Prime Minister did an excellent job yesterday in explaining. Go back to your seat. Go back to your seat. Well, if you're staying there, keep quiet. You understand now? Okay.
Mr. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mr. Daly, you're a former minister. Please live up to the standard of the House. Please allow the minister to speak without disruption. Minister, please address the speaker.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, did an excellent job yesterday in explaining that the JLP administration of the period 07 to 11 was the government that initiated the path of fiscal responsibility and the stability which is bearing fruits today. It is we who planted the tree that is bearing shade today as far back as 2009. The Prime Minister highlighted that the JLP had initiated the fiscal responsibility framework, divested loss-making state entities, and launched the historic Jamaica debt exchange in 2010. In addition, when the JLP left office in 2011, we had strengthened tax administration and introduced the central treasury management system. We introduced the junior stock exchange to attract. We introduced the junior stock exchange to attract small and medium-sized businesses to the capital markets. It was the present leader of the opposition who, when he was Minister of Finance, wanted to lock down the junior stock exchange from end of March 2016, and the Labour Party decided to keep it open. We defied your decision to close down the stock exchange. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Minister
Mr. Speaker,
Minister,
you guys don't know Mr. Speaker what?
You left the Ministry of Finance in shambles.
Minister Shaw, Minister Shaw, could you hold a minute for me, please? Could you have a seat? Members, Mr. Daly, you have left your seat and you have come up here to create a problem. I'm going to ask you if you have to stand on a point of order and ask your question. You cannot sit down. You cannot sit down and disrupt the speaker. And Minister Phillips, former minister, please, as leader, when you want to speak, you know how to do it.
Speaker,
if you have to, I am not asking you to address. I am not asking you to address me now.
Okay, well,
I'm not asking you to address me as yet.
I am asking you to be equitable. I'm asking you to be equitable.
Minister Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to ask you, Minister Shaw, do not address individual members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speak to me, address the nation. Go ahead, Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to repeat it, that the junior stock, I want to repeat it because the context of the junior stock exchange is not a joke. Jamaica is bedeviled by a problem called high informality in the economy. We have a challenge to move our economy to a more formal economy. That formality is increasingly becoming a requirement in a global environment of de-risking and money laundering and all the different problems within the global financial markets. We have a need to create a more formal economy in Jamaica. And the small and micro enterprise sector need to have access to equity financing as a substitute to high interest cost financing as well. That is why we established a junior stock exchange. And it has been successful by any standard of measurement. Right now, Mr. Speaker, there are another 17 companies waiting to be listed on the junior stock exchange. And it is of such fundamental importance to this government that I have instructed the stock exchange to now look, because this junior stock exchange is 50 million to 500 million in capitalization requirement. I've instructed them, and they are actively looking at a micro stock exchange from $5 million to $50 million will be a part of encouraging more formality in the economy. Mr. Speaker, we reduced inflation to single digits, down to 6% and less. We have improved consumer and business confidence significantly. We reduced government treasury bill rates to 30-year lows into single digits. We have increased net international reserve exchange reserves to, at that time in 2011, we had increased it to $2 billion. Now it is almost $4 billion under this government. We reduced at that time our borrowing rates from the multilaterals to lower single-digit levels. When I left in 2011, we borrowed money at 7.95%. My predecessor had been borrowing money up to 11 and 12% junk bond rates. Those were the rates that they were borrowing money on the international capital markets. And now I should remind this House that we have once again reduced borrowing costs on the international market to a new historic low of 5%. 5%. Mr. Speaker, after debt increased during the global recession in 2008 to 2009, we started to reduce, let me repeat, reduced Jamaica's debt as a percentage of gross domestic product between 2010 and 2011. And I mentioned that before. We were growing the economy from negative growth to positive growth of 1.7% in 2011, according to Statin. Mr. Speaker, that was because we had the global economic crisis. What happened? You're hard of hearing? You're hard of hearing, not true? Let me make it clear. This government on this side, we are proud of the fact that while there was implosion all over the world, from Greece to Ireland, all over, we kept this economy stable in the world economic crisis. And we have nothing to apologize about. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not the track record of a bankrupt or profligate government, but an administration that responded responsibly to the world's global economic recession in our lifetime, and which put Jamaica firmly back on a path to growth. Those are the facts. These are the facts, not the fairy tale that the opposition spokesman on finance would have us believe, or the leader of the opposition. I feel obliged to add, Mr. Speaker, that after experiencing 1.7% growth in 2011, the growth rates of the PNP for the next 4 years, I want you to hear this, after we peaked at, after we brought growth back to 1.7% in 2000, you don't want to hear this, right? You don't want to hear this. After we brought growth to 1.7% in 2011, the growth rates of the People's National Party for the next 4 years never exceeded 1%. In fact, their average growth for the 4 years that they managed between 2012 and 2016, the average growth rate for the 4 years is 0.7%. And by the way, it's somewhere else in my speech, but I might as well tell you now that in our 2 years, including flood and drought conditions, our average for the 2 years is 1.1%. We're over the 1% already. I'll go on there, don't have 0.7. It's all right. You see? You see? You know, the one redeeming quality about the opposition spokesman and finance, you know, is that, you know, Mr. Speaker, and you know, we have to say some things when we must say it when it's appropriate. When I was 12 years old, I developed a condition called septic arthritis. And I was sent to, I had septic arthritis, not in my brain, but in my hip. And I went to the university, I was taken to the university hospital, and I was treated by a professor called Professor John Golden. Yes. I was on my back. I was on my back in that hospital for almost 3 months with that condition. Professor John Golden, who took care of me. So, just because of that, I'm going to handle you with tender care. But don't abuse it, okay? So, Mr. Speaker, economic growth was minus 0.6% in 2012, 0.5% in 13, 0.7% in 14, and 0.9% in 2015. It was only after we returned that we brought growth to 1%, which was 1.4% in 2016. We grew the economy by 1.4% in 2016. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party government can boast a strong record of growth. In the 1960s, we averaged almost 6% a year. And after the disaster of the 1970s, we came back, stabilized it, and grew the economy by 6% a year again from 1986 until 1990. The correct historical narrative, therefore, Mr. Speaker, based on the fact, is that the JLP administration of 2007 to 11 embarked on a path of fiscal reform and responsibility that was continued by the PNP in 2012 to 2016, and which we resumed when we returned to power 2 years ago. Mr. Speaker, on economic growth, the opposition spokesman finance published a chart comparing growth rates under the PNP and the JLP over the past decade. Once again, I'm compelled to set the record straight. First, using his own numbers, the economic growth record of the PNP in its last term was a paltry, as I said, annual average of 0.7%. I pointed out already that the JLP handed over an economy 1.7% in 2011. Using his numbers, the JLP track record of economic growth in the first 2 years of our administration. As I said, 50% higher than the PNP. Using his numbers, we have improved, are on the right track, and we did not have the weather issues. Our GDP, had we not had the weather issues, our GDP would have been closer to or over 2% on its way to higher levels of growth. And there is more growth to come, Mr. Speaker. That is our focus, and that is our priority. Second, this is important, because we are speaking to the people of Jamaica as well. If we were to compare the JLP and PNP track records on growth since independence, Mr. Speaker, the cumulative real growth rate of the PNP over 28 years is 8.7%, and the cumulative real growth rate of the JLP over 23 years is 57.7%. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is the party of economic growth. Argument done. Argument finished. Third, Mr. Speaker, during the first JLP administration in the 1960s, average GDP was 5.7%, with a high of almost 12% in 1970. 12% in 1 year, 1970. By the way, Mr. Speaker, that 12% in 1 year in 1970 was the entire record of the performance of a former Minister of Finance for 14 years. His total average for the entire 14 years was 12%. And we did that in one single year in 1970. My God, oh God, our help in the age is past. We have the hope, though, because we have the great builder right here. We have the hope for years to come, right here. Mr. Speaker, during the 1970s, Jamaica experienced negative growth for the first time since independence under the PNP, with an average in the 70s from 73 to 80, negative 2.3% was the average growth. What? Minus zero. That was their growth. Wow.
2009 was a bigger crisis. Members, I'm hearing too many voices. I wish to hear the Minister of Finance alone. Minister, I wish you would direct your presentation to the Speaker, and so that they will not be attempting to answer you.
Mr. Speaker,
they can stand on a point of order to answer you.
Mr. Speaker, my apologies, sir. And for the remainder of my speech, I will try to let you have my undivided attention. So, Mr. Speaker, when the JLP returned to power in 1980, we returned to a growth path with an average of 2.2%, and that was the first set of part of the 1980s was trying to rebalance from 7 consecutive years of negative growth. So we had problems, and we also had negative growth in a couple of 2 or 3 of those years. We did. And so, but once we rebalanced, we went to a high of 8% growth in 1987. 1987. We haven't seen 8% growth since 1987. That was under Labour Party government. And during the disastrous period of the PNP in the 1990s and early 2000s, When the global growth averaged 3%, Jamaica's GDP growth fell to an average of 1.5%. And that average was only one. That average was 1.5 because you took from us some years of growth. If you never have that push start, it would be less than 1%. Mr. Speaker, on taxes, the opposition spokesman and the opposition leader have provided incorrect and incomplete data to this honorable House. They claim that the 1.5 million plan only benefited a relatively small number of persons and cost the taxpayers $31 billion. Here are the facts. The JLP introduced a revenue-neutral budget which involved taxes of $27.3 billion, not $31 billion. Correction. Fact check. Fact check. In addition, the number of persons, the number of persons who benefited from the 1.5 million plan is approximately 213,000 persons who benefited from it. The opposition spokesman claims that those persons who benefited from the 1.5 plan are, and I quote, he said, the rich getting richer. We agree that these persons got more money in their pocket, but it is irresponsible and plain wrong to claim that these hard-working Jamaican taxpayers are rich when they are making less than $1.5 million a year. They're not rich. They're not rich. Them rich, they are rich and coming to indirect taxes because they're going to educate you this evening. Going to educate you. Are coming to indirect taxes.
Mr. Shaw, Minister Shaw, could you hold a minute? Could you rest a minute? Mr. Warmington. Mr. Shaw,
Mr.
your
Speaker,
time. Mr. Shaw, your time.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I'm speaking to you, definitely. Mr. Speaker. Okay.
Will you rest? Will you rest a minute?
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the Honourable Minister of Finance time be extended sufficiently to allow him to complete his presentation.
I'll know what to do.
Those in favour? Those against? Mr. Shaw. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Speaker.
Members,
Mr.
you have
Speaker.
to understand that the member is making a presentation.
Mr. Speaker.
And he's unable
Mr. Speaker,
to do so with everybody talking.
Before I continue my presentation, I want to remind the opposition spokesman on finance that I listened to him with a spirit of calm and quiet comportment. And I expect reciprocal treatment. If you used to conduct yourself somewhere else like that, don't bring it here. You listen to me. I am speaking now. So, I am now going to lay the rules down. You listen to me, okay? Mr. Speaker, the opposition conveniently omitted the onerous tax packages that they placed on the people of this country when they were in power that make our tax packages look more than generous. Here is the relevant comparison, Mr. Speaker. Fiscal year 2012-13, the PNP took $19.5 billion in taxes and they gave nothing back. Net cost, $19.5 billion. In fiscal year 13-14, the PNP took $15.9 billion in taxes and gave nothing back. Net cost for that year, $15.9 billion. But in fiscal year 14-15, the PNP took $6.7 billion in taxes and gave nothing back. Net cost for that year, $6.7 billion. Fiscal year 15-16, their last fiscal year, the PNP took $10.3 billion in taxes and gave nothing back. $10.3 billion. A total of $52.4 billion over 4 years, and gave nothing back to the people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, so barefaced is the opposition and their surrogates on social media that they posted after we had no new taxes. They posted on social media, Mr. Speaker, that in 2013, the minister had announced in his budget speech, no new taxes. And that was posted on social media. I had to immediately, at a press conference the following morning, in the presence of the IMF, I had to immediately correct the fact that they did not have a tax package in the budget in April of that year, because they had already imposed the tax package from February of that year. A tax package of $14.9 billion had already been imposed. So they never need to impose no taxes again in the budget debate. So, Mr. Speaker, when we assumed government in 2016, we kept our 1.5 million promise to the Jamaican people. And so, let me just say this, because, you know, they hold up their paper to show what Labour Party had promised. And now we're dealing with it frontally now. I am dealing with it frontally. That's the purpose of a reply. And the answer is yes, we did advertise that. Yes, we did say we would not have any tax package. But, Mr. Speaker, the opposition knows that the IMF opinion at the time was that we should not give the benefit to only one segment of the taxpayers. They wanted horizontal equity for all of the taxpayers. And so they said to us, the entire universe of taxpayers should get the benefit. So when we put this entire universe together, we then realized that we had to have a tax package to compensate for the benefit. So, Mr. Speaker, when we put on the 1.5, in fiscal year 16-17, we imposed a tax package of $13.8 billion was taken in taxes. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? $12.5 billion was given back to the taxpayers of this country. Net cost to the people, $1.3 billion. In fiscal year 17-18, we put in a tax package of $13.52 billion taken in taxes, and $13.5 billion was given back to the people. And for fiscal year 2018-19, in this budget, Mr. Speaker, no new taxes. So, Mr. Speaker, under 4 years of the PNP, the total net cost of their tax package, $52.4 billion. In the past 2 years, we had a total package of $27.3 billion and gave back $26 billion. The net cost of our tax package is $1.3 billion. The Bible tells us that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. The JLP government has subscribed to this precept. The PNP, however, has developed its own principle, which goes something like this. The PNP taketh and taketh more, and taketh even more, and giveth nothing. The JLP, Mr. Speaker, is a party of real social justice and a government that truly cares. This 1.5 plan has been seminal. It has been game-changing, and the people of Jamaica love it. And the only reason why them pitch on the 1.5 every minute so is because the 1.5, it a hot them and it a bond them, Mr. Speaker. It a bond them. I should also add that the opposition spokesmen are being disingenuous when they say that the poor have suffered under our tax packages because of the increase in bus fare and GCT on food and electricity. The facts, Mr. Speaker, are that JLP did not impose GCT on basic foods. We are on electricity below 150 kilowatt hours, or increased bus fares, let us be honest. And Mr. Speaker, the nature of our tax package was heavily skewed to indirect taxation, thus bringing more Jamaicans into the tax net. Mr. Speaker, I have stated before that it is the policy of this government to fundamentally restructure and overhaul our tax regime to make it more fair and equitable by moving from direct to indirect taxation. Most of us benefit from using the roads, having the protection of the police, sending our children to school, and receiving health care. However, there are hundreds of thousands of people in the informal sector in Jamaica who are not paying their fair share toward these basic services because they are not paying income taxes, which is a direct tax. Direct taxes are taxes paid directly to the government, such as income tax, corporation tax, which is a smaller number who pay. Indirect taxes are those that are imposed on transactions involving goods and services, which are typically collected by intermediaries and which almost everyone pays. The policy of this government is to move away from direct taxes. I want to say to you that right now we are down to about 470,000 people on the income tax roll. With 1.5 implementation, we now have only about 70,000 people who are paying direct income taxes. And on the path and trajectory that this government continues on, we foresee the day when we will abolish PAYE and use indirect taxation to cover it. The policy of this government is to move away from direct taxes, which place an unfair and undue burden on a smaller group of taxpayers, and to move towards indirect taxes, which are distributed across a larger number of persons. The informal sector pays its fair share of the tax burden. Here are the facts, Mr. Speaker. Jamaica has approximately 1.3 million, just under 1.3 million employed persons, but fewer than 500,000 people on the income tax register, 470,000. The 800,000 who are not on the income tax register are the informal, mostly informal economy. A lot of them are in the informal economy by definition. The sad reality, therefore, is that the burden of taxation falls disproportionately heavily on the captive PAYE workers, including our police, our nurses, our teachers, people of modest incomes. The burden is on them. Our policy is to change this and make the tax system more fair, equitable, and reliable, and not fall disproportionately on PAYE workers. The opposition spokesman falsely claims that this government has failed to increase spending above inflation to various areas such as education, police, and health. Here are the facts, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking to you, Mr. Speaker. Here are the facts. In our budget, the allocation to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, listen, you might learn something. You ain't learning nothing when you're talking. And I'm instructing you to listen, or you're going back to your seat. Orderly. In education, the allocation to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information increased from $98.9 billion to $101.6 billion, an increase of $2.7 billion. And yes, Deacon, you're shaking your head. All right, I'm coming to you. This is the largest allocation to any single ministry outside of the Ministry of Finance of government, and reflects this government's strong commitment to education and the youth. And let me explain something. The over $2 billion, 2.7 to be exact, increase in the education spending comes against an increase last fiscal year of $5.2 billion. That's a total of $7.9 billion increase in 2 years. This allowed the government to move primary school allocations from $850 to $2,500 per child across the education system. We are putting our money where our mouth is. Compare and contrast this, Mr. Speaker, with the opposition, who in 2013, while inflation was 9%, cut the education budget by $3 billion. Yes, cut it by $3 billion in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has increased allocation to PATH and to school feeding program by an aggregate amount that exceeds the increases. Listen to this. The increases to the PATH program and the school feeding program has been increased by an aggregate amount that exceeds the increases over the 4 years of the last PNP government combined. This reflects this government's commitment to protecting the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. Let me read out some numbers to you. In 2015-16, the last fiscal year under which they managed, the expenditure for education was $2.994 billion, that's school feeding, and social security path, $4.2 billion, for a total in that fiscal year of $7.2 billion. Our first fiscal year, 16-17, we spent the same amount for the school feeding program, $2.994 billion. We increased the path to $5 billion, up from $4.2 billion, for a total of $8 billion in 16-17. In 17-18, we moved from the $2.9 billion for school feeding to $4.7 billion for school feeding. And we further increased the PATH program up from $5 billion to $6.1 billion. For a total moving up now from the $7 billion in 15-16, this past fiscal year we're wrapping up now, the total school feeding and cash grant is $10.8 billion. And for the new fiscal year, we have the $4.7 billion again for school feeding. PATH program is going up to $6.9 billion. So here what the final is now for this new fiscal year, compared with $7.2 billion where you left it. And by the way, the year before, 14-15, you had the expenditure at $7.8 billion. The following year, you dropped it to $7.2 billion. Well, our final figure for 18-19, 4.7 for school feeding, 6.9 for path and other cash grants, $11.675 billion in 1819. Don't say that the Labour Party government is not taking care of the vulnerable people in our society. And don't even bother, while we're on that, spending on flood damage, 15, 16, 12, 13, $200 million, 13, 14, $197 million, 14, 15, $463 million, 15, 16, $475 million, 16, 17 on the Labour Party government, $606 million, 17, 18, $1.362 billion on road repairs in flood damage areas, flood damage control, and projected even more in the next fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the opposition spokesman accused us of having no crime plan, of underspending on national security, and of reducing the allocation to the police by $93 million. Where you get that from? Where you get it from? You have to show me which book that in a master. I don't know where you got it. The total allocation to the Ministry of National Security in fiscal year 2018-19, Mr. Speaker, is $78.5 billion. 24% higher than the $63.6 billion in the fiscal year 17-18. Demonstrates that we're serious about fighting crime. The recurrent expenditure on the police department, which is what was being referenced by you, the recurrent expenditure on the police department has been increased, not decreased, from $33.5 billion to $35.3 billion, an increase of $1.8 billion for the police. The opposition spokesman has misled the House. Let me turn to the very important issue of the wage negotiations currently underway. I'd like to read a quotation you may have heard before. Want to listen carefully now, everybody? Yes? You too. Mr. Speaker, listen to this quotation. Listen to this quotation. Everybody, hush. Hush. What the government, this is a quotation now. What the government has offered in the wage negotiations is what we can afford at this time. It might appear to some to be far easier to listen to the voices of political expediency and make commitments to wage increases, which the present level of available resources could not support. To proceed on that path, however, would only end up reversing the progress we have made and betray the trust we have built locally and internationally. We would lose all the gains that the country has made thus far. I don't know who says so. Make us see. Mr. Speaker, this is a quotation from the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. To paraphrase the opposition spokesman on finance, where is the Peter Phillips of 2015 today? Where is he? Where? I can't see you. Okay. Mr. Speaker, let me quote from the editorial in today's Jamaica Observer. Dr. Phillips called on the government to pay the additional wage demands of the public sector workers above the 16% offer. However, he, more than anyone in Jamaica, knows that the offer is the maximum possible at this time, while sticking with the IMF program. He knows that going beyond the 16% would mean Jamaica immediately breaking with the IMF
Mr. Speaker,
and
just on a point
derailing
of order.
the program.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
I have never said anywhere that the government should pay more. I have said they should be creative and find other ways. He's quoting from a document. Order, please. He is quoting from a document and he cannot certify the accuracy of the document from which he quotes.
Minister Shaw, Minister Shaw, you have to state where you. The member is stating that he did not say.
Hold on, I have to hear this, Yes?
The member has asked me to advise you that you have misled the House.
That was misled.
That he did not say what you are saying. So will you...
Mr. Speaker, I am reading from an editorial in a reputable newspaper, and I wish to end the quotation, and we will give the leader of the opposition every opportunity to respond in whatever way he wishes. Okay? Anyway, it says it would mean Jamaica immediately breaking with the IMF and derailing the program that has set the country on the path to growth. It seems that the strategic program he fought so hard to resurrect is now of less importance than his resurgent political ambition. I like that one. Resurgent political ambition. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased and proud to announce today. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased and proud to announce today. I'm announcing that I'm not going to allow anybody to draw me tongue.
Please, do not disturb
and
the
yes,
member.
I have to admit that I have a master's degree in journalism. But I've never gotten a job with any of the newspapers locally. And I don't write guest editorials either. Okay, but Mr. Speaker, I want to announce today that the nurses and the teachers with whom I have interacted and the Minister of State, Roger Spencer, has interacted, just yesterday have accepted our offer to pay the 5% retroactive back to April of last year. Mr. Speaker, this payment is being made, is treated, I want to make this clear. This payment is being treated as a non-prejudicial advance payment, which will in no way compromise our ongoing negotiations, which continue. To be clear, you know, Mr. Speaker, them vexed that we are going to pay the public sector workers their money retroactive to last year, April 1. I vex them, vex, bad mind. Yes, vex. I vex you, vex. Let it be clear, I, as Minister of Finance, has ordered that every public sector worker must get their money this month, this week, retroactive to April of last year. be clear, we must make the retroactive payment in this fiscal year.
Mr. Shaw,
Mr. Speaker, yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I want to make it clear to you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead,
to you,
Mr. Shaw.
to you.
You address
Yes.
me.
Mr. Speaker, we must make the retroactive payments in this fiscal year, because to do it next year would violate Jamaica's fiscal responsibility law. Please remember that these payments in no way limit the rights of the trade unions to negotiate their new wage settlement. It is simply a prepayment. It is a prepayment that would otherwise have to be delayed. I want to make it clear. It's a prepayment that would otherwise have to be delayed until 2020. I urge, Mr. Speaker, hold on now, hold on. I see what your strategy is, you know. You guys don't want the people to hear what I'm saying. You don't want the people to hear what I'm saying. They are not being abused, that's why we are paying them the money. Don't draw me tongue, you're too bad minds. That's your problem. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Daly. Mr. Daly. Mr. Daly, please do not
Mr.
disturb
Speaker,
the House.
I want to
Warmington. Mr. Warmington, please.
Mr. Speaker.
Between you and Mr. Daly, I'm going to have to ask both of you to go outside for a moment.
I want to urge the Police Federation to also come on board.
All right, let's go. Go ahead, Mr. Shaw.
I want to urge the Police Federation to also come on board no later than tomorrow, so that we can pay our hard-working policemen and women their 5% retroactive pay to April last year. And it will be paid without prejudicing their ongoing negotiations. Our policemen and women, our nurses, our teachers, all of them deserve their back pay like everybody else. They deserve them back pay. Mr. Speaker, opposition members, don't be grudgeful about it, because let me tell you why. Hold on. Some of them want to oppose it and check your bank account. Members of Parliament has gotten their back pay to April of last year. You have gotten it. So if you get it, why shouldn't our teachers get it? Why shouldn't our nurses get it? Why shouldn't our police get it? A bad mind and a bad mind.
Mr. Daly. Mr. Warmington. Mr. Warmington.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am compelled to respond to the assertion by the Leader of the Opposition that this government gave up $4 billion in bauxite levy proceeds, which could have been used to pay the workers. First of all, the Leader of the Opposition knows that it don't work that way. The wage to GDP ratio is an issue that has to be met. And it is wrong for you to correlate $4 billion of levy to the payment of the workers. You know why. Because you have to honor the 9% wage to GDP ratio. By the way, when we set that ratio, it should have been achieved from 2012-13. You got the IMF to extend it to 2016. You never undertook it, you never did it. We are doing it. We are demonstrating that we have the ability to do it and to fulfill that objective. Mr. Speaker, When the JLP returned to government in 2016, the bauxite industry continued to be in serious trouble. Noranda was in arbitration with the government. Its parent company had filed for bankruptcy in the United States, and the letter of credit that the government could have drawn on, US $12.6 billion, was allowed to expire. And they never draw down on that letter of credit for United States $12.6 million, which is much more than the $4 billion of which you speak right now, Jamaica. You never took it up. You are the Minister of Finance. You could have drawn it and you never draw it. Right? You want to know about giveaway levy? I have a chart showing the giveaway of levies. And in 3 years under your government, levy, 0. Year 1. Levy, year 2, 0. Levy, year 3, 0. In that chart, I see no other 0 nowhere else, whether JLP government or not. But under your time, 0, 0, 0. Hypocrite! You're a hypocrite! Hypocrite!
Mr. Shaw.
Sure that you...
Mr. Shaw, members must be very careful how they address other members. And I'm going to ask you, I am speaking, Mr. Warmington. Mr. Shaw,
Thank you, Mr. I will withdraw. I will not call the member a hypocrite. I will just say that the leader of the opposition is being hypocritical about this issue.
Mr. Speaker, let the record show.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, make mouth for chat, and I don't expect the appropriate standards from him. But, Mr. Speaker, let it be clear that we inherited a regime that withdrew the levy. We agreed with it in the period 08, 09, and 10 and beyond. We were bound by it and we fulfilled it. It expired in 15, 16, 14, 15, 15, 16. If he wants to call the fact that we honored an agreement entered into by the previous administration hypocritical, so be it. He's entitled to any kind of behavior which he wants.
Mr. Shaw, please proceed. Mr. Shaw. Minister Shaw. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Government and cabinet have to balance and weigh issues. Look at the case of Alpart, in which we have decided as a cabinet to grant 5 years of no levy. For 5 years. Okay, but I still went about it. Because you're speaking about levy in a general sense. And I am talking about this. You're not stopping me from talking about it. Alpart's plant.
Order, please. Order from those on the back bench. On the government side.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please, for those on the back bench. Ministers, please. Give Mr. Shaw an opportunity to finish his presentation.
Mr. Speaker, the JLP administration is seeking to rescue this vital industry. We completed talks with the DISCO at Alpart that you had begun, yes, and made an investment initially of substantial funds to purchase the plants from UC Rusal in addition to investment in the restart of the operations, which is now up and running. They are already employing over close to 1,000 people and in terms of other employees via Jamaican contractors. I should add that after extensive negotiations, GISCO is planning to invest way bigger than was originally conceptualized. GISCO is planning to invest over $6 billion United States dollars in Jamaica, which involves building a second alumina plant, as well as a major industrial and agro-industrial complex that involves working with small farmers to produce a wide range of fresh and processed agricultural products. In addition, GISCO plans to establish an industrial processing center to manufacture aluminum foil and other products for export into the Western Hemisphere. This investment would also serve to attract other companies to invest in the special economic zone. I met this week with representatives of 3 other large companies that have expressed a strong interest in establishing operations in the industrial park. With Noranda, we completed the arbitration hearings and negotiated new ownership, aptly named New Day, to take over the center and operations, saving 300 jobs direct. We rescued the US $12.5 million letter of credit that had expired. Now we have implemented a profit-sharing regime. At Windalco Yuatan, the latest concession ends the latest concession ends on March 31, 2018. The economy of Saint-Anne is doing well because we have kept the Noranda arrangement going. At Windalco Yuatan, the latest concession ends on March 31, 2018, at which time the company is expected to revert to the standard fiscal regime. Windalco Yuatan employs over 1,000 persons directly and hundreds more in the surrounding community, is one of the largest tax contributors to the Jamaican economy, and is currently about to undertake, because the plant is old, rickety, in danger of being totally unproductive. They are undertaking a US $122 million long-term capital investment program over the next 5 years. We have to take everything into consideration, Mr. Speaker. As a government, we have a duty and a responsibility to establish the priorities. Mr. Speaker, of significance, as I wrap up this section of my presentation and heading for closure, of significance, let us not forget Clarendon Alumina Partners, also known as CAP. The PNP administration of 1989 to 2007, you're balling about 4 billion Jamaican dollars. Let's not forget that your government of that time negotiated a disastrous agreement when they agreed on a fixed price forward purchase for alumina with Glencore. When oil prices increased and the global price of alumina rose, the government was forced to sell to Glencore at the fixed price. They couldn't sell it even at the cost price of production. And they lost out on hundreds of millions of US dollars, close to US $600 million. The government of Jamaica, taxpayers, had to find that money to pay Glencore. In today's exchange rate, that is $77 billion of reckless mismanagement under that arrangement, and you mustn't forget about it. I will not make you forget about it. And you accuse us of being irresponsible. Shame, shame, shame. Mr. Speaker, all 4 companies in the industry continue to pay significant amounts in taxes today. The JLP took decisive and necessary action to save the bauxite industry. It is disingenuous and irresponsible for the opposition to claim that this money was given away when we saved the industry, preserved billions of dollars in other taxpayers, and provided employment for thousands of people. Mr. Speaker, Let me address a few areas of policy recommendations raised by the opposition spokesman on finance and the leader of the opposition. As the Prime Minister pointed out so effectively in his presentation yesterday, this government is one of action, results, and performance. While the members on the other side like to talk about ideas and make suggestions, they're a party of conceptualizers and dreamers. We're a party of builders and doers. The opposition spokesman identified 4 areas that the next PNP administration would emphasize and prioritize: land titling, early childhood education, unattached youth, tertiary education. The good news for the Jamaican people, Mr. Speaker, is that these areas are where both sides agree must be addressed, and we are addressing these areas. We are committed to getting things done and providing results. We are the party of action, and we are in action. When you hear the Prime Minister talk yesterday, we are in action. He has addressed the land titling, Prime Minister, and plans for unattached youth, as well as affordable housing. The Ministry of Education has embarked on a program of certifying and upgrading our basic schools, which will continue. And I want to make it clear now that I intend to engage, along with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, with the Minister of Education to look at ways to speed up that program of certification on an even more aggressive basis than we are doing now. In addition, the Student Loan Bureau has increased the number of beneficiaries and amounts disbursed, and we fully intend for this number to grow. Fewer than 30% of our workforce has tertiary education, which is far less than some other countries in the Caribbean, which have over 50%, and others like in the United States, over 80%. We can and we will do better. When I was minister in 2007, we were lending only close to $7 billion at the Student Loan Bureau. When I left, we were lending close to $14 billion in 2011. We will continue with this program of making funds available to our students. Mr. Speaker, the opposition has also claimed that we have treated the pensioners unfairly and have not addressed the issue of minimum wage. This is another area where both sides are committed to improving the lives of our pensioners and ensuring that our workers are well paid. In fact, with regard to the National Insurance Scheme, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security has just received a report from the actuaries in which there is a recommendation for an increase in benefits this year. The Ministry intends to take this recommendation to Cabinet, and the actual increase will be announced by the Minister at a later date. With regard to the minimum wage, the Ministry of Labour is awaiting a recommendation from the Commission on Minimum Wage. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my mother always taught me to be humble and not speak highly of myself. So let me say a few words that others have said about us and about what we are doing in Jamaica. On March 9, the IMF published its concluding statement of the 2018 Article 4 analysis and the results of the third review of the standby arrangement. In that document, the IMF stated, and I quote, "Considerable progress has been, IMF, considerable progress has been achieved on macroeconomic policies and outcomes. Fiscal discipline anchored by the fiscal responsibility law, which we put into place, has been essential to reduce public debt and secure macroeconomic stability. Employment is at historic highs. Inflation and the current account deficit are modest. International reserves are at a comfortable level, and the external borrowing costs are at historical lows." End of the IMF quotation. We are moving in the right direction. And I know me say so, and the IMF says so. Mr. Speaker, The president of the Inter-American Development Bank, Luis Alberto Moreno, in February of this year stated, and I quote, "Jamaica is on the path to becoming the Caribbean's first digital society and is positioning itself to make the giant leap forward to improving the lives of its people through digital innovation. We are improving lives." No, me say so, is IDB say so. The United Nations recently published its annual happiness index, which ranks 156 countries by their happiness level, measuring issues such as income, healthy life expectancy, and freedom. In the 2018 report, which was just recently released, Jamaica moved up 20 spaces from 73 with a score of 5.513 to 56 with a score of 5.890. This improvement represents a turnaround from the 2016 report, when Jamaica had the 12th largest rate of decline in happiness among in the countries in the report. Jamaicans are clearly happier today than they were 2 years ago. 1.5 and all, and I say so, the United Nations says so. The opposition leader accused the JLP of failing to take a firm stand against corruption. Really, Mr. Speaker, what are the facts? Last year, this government piloted the passage of the long-awaited Integrity Commission Act to establish a single anti-corruption body to investigate and prosecute corruption in Jamaica. Action, Mr. Speaker. This, we have passed it. This is in part, Mr. Speaker, why in the most recent version of the Corruption Perception Index report by Transparency International made public in February of this year, Jamaica made significant strides in tackling corruption, surging 15 places to 68. These findings were made public by none other than the Executive Director of National Integrity Action and former PNP Senator, Professor Trevor Monroe, who announced Jamaica's performance in 2017 reflected an improvement in score on the Corruption Perception Index from 38 to 44 on a scale of 0 to 100, and a jump upwards of some 15 places from number 83 of 176 countries in 2016 to 68 of 180 countries in 2018. Jamaica is making strides against corruption. I know me say so, Trevor Monroe says so, and the Corruption Prevent Index says so. The opposition spokesman on finance also attempted to mislead this House by saying that this government, and I quote, has done virtually nothing in this vital area of improving business conditions in the 2 years since they assumed office. To support his position, he cites the World Bank Doing Business report, stating that Jamaica moved up from 85 to 58th place under the PNP, and since the JLP has come into power, Jamaica has dropped to 70 positions. The opposition spokesman is a lawyer and should do his research. In the actual Doing Business report, the raw score for Jamaica in both reports is the same. Jamaica has not gotten worse. Others have simply gotten better. Jamaica has not gotten worse. But you wanted to give the impression that we had gotten worse. And me I tell you, say you must not give the wrong impression. We have not gotten worse. And meanwhile, others have gotten better. And it should be an inspiration to us to also make sure that we hurry up and get better too. And that is fine. Mr. Speaker, this government has made significant strides in improving conditions for doing business by the private sector, including the official launch of the GovJM online portal last year, a one-stop shop for government-related information and services. GovJM will help to reduce costs while improving efficiency. The spokesman also made reference to the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce Consumer Business Confidence Index. Here again are the facts. In the most recent survey prior to the general election in 2016, both the consumer and business confidence indices were lower than a score of 125 using their scoring methodology. In the 2 years since the JLP has been in power, both the consumer and business confidence indices have surged past a score of 140. These are facts, Mr. Speaker. In the past 2 years, businesses have become more confident and more ebullient about the future, and so have consumers. Not me say so, it's the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce say so. Mr. Speaker, several members of the media and social commentators have also evaluated the budget speeches with almost universal praise for our no new taxes budget. Here is just one example, Mr. Speaker. See it here? Written and published in the newspaper. The title, The Best Budget Ever, by Dennis Strong. Yes? Oh yes, him. Yes. Former executive director of the private sector organization of Jamaica. Best budget ever. And he wrote in there that this is the best I have experienced to date. Not me say so. Dennis Strong said so. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the spokesman surprisingly raised the recent Don Anderson Gleaner poll, which questioned a cross-section of Jamaicans. In that poll, which was released last week, respondents were asked who they would vote for if a general election were held at this time. Of those who indicated that they would vote for a party, 57% said they would vote for the Jamaica Labour Party, 43% say they would vote for the People's National Party. A 14% difference. According to Anderson, the standings show that the JLP has greater support across all the categories polled when compared with the opposition People's National Party. I would not normally raise an opinion poll in a budget debate, but since the opposition spokesman decided to raise it, I am compelled to respond. The Jamaican people prefer the JLP to the PNP to run the country under Michael Andrew Holness. Period. That's it. I know me say so. It is said by others instead, including the people of Jamaica, in the form of a scientific poll. So, Mr. Speaker, I come to my conclusion. Mr. Speaker, the people of Jamaica have entrusted the members of this honorable House to represent their hopes and to provide strong and effective leadership in making those hopes and dreams a reality. I'm begging you to listen to me. I'm begging you to listen to me. I want you to hear this. I want everybody to hear this. Because our people in this country are distressed, and the people tired of the quarreling. The people want better governance. And better governance begins with a vigilant parliament that is, yes, vibrant, but must be respectful. The people of Jamaica have entrusted the members of this House to represent their hopes and to provide strong and effective leadership in making those hopes and dreams a reality. We all have a responsibility as elected representatives to remain true to ourselves and our values, as well as to the needs and desires of our constituents. The expressions of divergent views is an essential demonstration of the strong democratic principles that we as a people hold so dear. We are an intense and passionate people, and our politics reflect who we are. It is through this lively debate process that all parts of society have an opportunity to influence public policy and our national priorities. The policies debated in this House are not trivial. The macroeconomic program is not just about balancing numbers. It is more fundamentally and importantly about balancing and fulfilling the needs, the dreams, desires of the Jamaican people. It is about the fundamental transformation of our economy and of our society. Both parties should agree with the goal of prosperity for all Jamaicans. However, this is not possible without breaking with the failed policies of the past. I ask the members of this honorable House to lift their eyes beyond the horizon. I ask you to lay aside for a moment the contentious and divisive issues that must necessarily be debated with passion and intensity because they are so important to the Jamaican people. That is the essence and heart of democracy, which we all hold so dear. But I ask you to join me in remembering that this budget debate is also about a much bigger picture. It's about Jamaica's past and about Jamaica's future, even more importantly. Since 1989, while the rest of the world surged forward, Jamaica has muddled through 3 lost decades. There have been advances over that period, but these are somewhat limited in number and scope. They fall far short of what the Jamaican people deserved and deserve now. The actual cost to individual Jamaicans has not been counted, but its dimensions are immense. Untold numbers of children have suffered an irretrievable loss of opportunity through inadequate nutrition, education, and nurturing. Untold numbers of small and medium-sized companies have been forced out of business in the most painful and heart-wrenching manner, causing massive damage, even suicide in some cases. Untold numbers have been humbled, and poverty has become a constant companion or an inescapable trap for far too many Jamaicans. We should be able to expect that our children will have a better life than their parents. Mr. Speaker, in the Jamaica of 2018 in which we live, this expectation is not a reality for many Jamaicans. The policies of the past have not served us well and their usefulness has been exhausted. Visionary leadership is an essential part of the solution for a better and brighter future. The Prime Minister reminded us yesterday of the leadership displayed by the then Prime Minister Golden in 2009 when he took the bold decision to forge a new path for Jamaica that would break with its disappointing past. He gained national and international support for a historical program predicated upon fiscal responsibility, public sector transformation, and a sustained foundation for equitable growth. We have once again been called upon to forge a solemn pact with each other and with the people of Jamaica to embark on a new path of national prosperity. The Prime Minister has asked us all to resist the temptation to celebrate when growth falters. He has asked us to refrain from activities that will harm macroeconomic stability in the search for a few more votes. He has led by example in acknowledging the achievements of the opposition. And I wholeheartedly agree with the Prime Minister. We owe it to the Jamaican people to acknowledge when milestones are achieved. We all need to learn to say respect is due more often, even when it is our opponents who get the credit. We must transcend partisan politics for the future of this country. The price we pay for mistaken and misguided policies is way too high. That is why this annual budget debate is so important. We must listen to each other more and seek to build on each other's advances. We have all come to learn that it is Jamaica who loses when we seek to destroy what previous administrations have built. We must agree to exclude Jamaica's strategic national imperatives from our own petty partisan politics. We should all agree that we need fiscal responsibility and discipline as an essential, if not sufficient, prerequisite for economic growth. We should all agree that we need to remove red tape, improve the quality of public services, and reduce the overall cost of government. We should all agree that we need a trained and well-educated workforce, modern productive infrastructure, and a knowledge economy. We should all agree we need to bring crime under control, restore law and order, drive the scourge of senseless violence from our land. We should all agree that we need to increase and improve our economic growth rates and raise the standard of living for all Jamaicans. We should all agree we need to move from poverty to prosperity. Mr. Speaker, I pray that we will work together to ensure that when the history of this period is written, this will prove to have been a pivotal moment for Jamaica, because we chose to look beyond our short-term political differences to embrace a better, bigger, and brighter vision for Jamaica. For us to move from poverty to prosperity, we must understand that prosperity begins in the mind before it reaches the pocket. We must therefore build our nation on the cornerstone foundation of developing the minds of our young people, respecting human life, creating stronger bonds of family life, and improving productivity at the workplace. I have read this passage before in this honorable house, and I feel impelled to read it again, albeit a different version. No, it's a different version. And a different book. The book of Isaiah, chapter 58, verse 12, states, "And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the bridge, the restorer of the streets in which we dwell." Mr. Speaker, let us all commit to work together to be the repairers of the breach and the restorers of the streets in which to dwell. Let us work together to unleash the energy of the Jamaican people, to express our ingenuity and industry to the benefit of all. Let us pass the people's test. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the people of Jamaica, land we love.
Order. Mr. Shaw. Minister Shaw. Minister Shaw.
Speaker, I beg to move for second reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Clerk.
A bill entitled "An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund entitled "An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2019, and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament." Read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Members, I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for third reading of the bill.
Those in favor? Those against? Clerk. Clerk will read the bill a third time.
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum Out of the Consolidated Fund to the Service of the Year ending on the 31st day of March 2019 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament, read a third time and passed.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, before I move for the adjournment of the House, I would like to address one issue. And one thing is that I do not practice tribal politics, whether in this House or in Southwest St. Catherine. And, and in this House, we should have kins as legislature. And the issue is that today, I interpret, I'm very sorry the leader of opposition is not here, interpret his utterance as referring to me as the statement I made as a liar or dishonest in my statement. And these are two words that have never been referred to me in my life, or has ever been dishonest in my statement or my practice. What can be said that I'm outspoken, I may be faced, but never anyone accused me of being a liar or dishonest in any statement I've made. And I'm very hurt that anybody and any member in this House to refer to me in that respect as being a liar. The statement I made was genuine and it came from there. But the issue is, I believe that if a member on that side has an agreement or discussion with the minister on the side, they need to communicate with each other. That each person on that side understand what the understanding and agreement is between the opposition and the government. But if I get up and speak, I don't expect to be challenged that my word is dishonest or lie. Never yet that has been ever referred to me. And I'm hurt that a member should refer to me as a liar. No, I'm not crying that easily. Mr. Speaker, this is what I'm talking about. Mr. Speaker, it's the same thing I'm talking about. When we descend into garbage, Mr. Speaker, I want to move it, but when I'm speaking about the very same thing I'm referring to, you have the member from Northern Clarendon who has no class. I want to move the motion for adjournment. But I'm saying the same thing I'm talking about is when you have people like Northern Clarendon who have no class saying that. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, we have no it's not intent to do any further business today. So I now move for the House to be adjourned. You don't have no brain, no body, no feet. You're on the wheelchair. Mr. Speaker, no House to be adjourned the next Tuesday at 2 p.m. The 27th at 2 p.m.
That The motion is that the House be now adjourned until March the 27th at 2 p.m. Members, I am advising members, and I'm asking that members come to the House at 2 o'clock. And I'm asking that we do not allow what happened to happen again. Those in favor? Those against? This Honorable House stands adjourned until next week, March 27th at 2 p.m.